The champagne glasses were still raised when Brittany turned toward me with a smile that disappeared in an instant. Before I could understand what had changed, her hand struck my face so hard that my head snapped to the side. The sharp sting spread across my cheek while the word she spat at me echoed louder than the music. Trash. The room froze. Every conversation stopped. Guests stared in disbelief. Wesley stood frozen, unable to move, while Brittany's father looked completely shocked. I touched my cheek, trying to convince myself this was real. For years, I had ignored small insults and told myself staying quiet was better than creating conflict. But this wasn't another careless comment. It was public humiliation. Brittany folded her arms, waiting for me to react. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply looked at her, then around the room where every guest watched in silence. I took one slow breath, picked up my purse and turned toward the exit. No one there realized that within the next 10 minutes, the life Brittany believed was secure would begin falling apart, and she would never see it coming. My name is Diane and I'm 61 years old. If you had met me before that birthday party, you probably wouldn't have remembered much about me. I wasn't the loudest person in the room or the one telling stories that made everyone laugh. I was simply the woman who showed up, helped clean the dishes, remembered birthdays, and quietly went home before anyone noticed I had left. That was enough for me. For nearly 35 years I worked as an accountant. Numbers made sense because they never lied. If you paid attention, they always told the truth. People were different. They smiled while hiding resentment, made promises they never planned to keep, and sometimes treated kindness like weakness. After retiring, my world became much smaller. My husband, Grant, had passed away several years earlier after a sudden illness. Losing him left a silence in my life that never completely disappeared. We had built everything together from the ground up, and learning to live without him was harder than I ever imagined. The one person who kept me moving forward was my son, Wesley. He had always been a thoughtful boy. Even after he became an adult, he still called to check on me, stopped by with groceries when I insisted I didn't need anything, and never forgot my birthday. Watching him grow into a decent man made every sacrifice worth it. When he married Brittany, I truly wanted their marriage to succeed. I never expected to become another mother in her life. I wasn't interested in giving unwanted advice or controlling their decisions. They deserved the chance to build their own family without me standing in the middle of it. So I stayed in the background. If they needed help, I helped. If they wanted space, I gave it. I convinced myself that being appreciated wasn't nearly as important as keeping peace in the family. Looking back now, I realize I spent years making myself smaller so everyone else could feel comfortable. I ignored little comments that should have bothered me. I smiled through moments that quietly chipped away at my dignity. I believed that patience would eventually earn respect. I couldn't have been more wrong. The woman Brittany slapped that evening wasn't someone who enjoyed conflict. She was a widow who had spent her entire life putting others first. But everyone has a limit, even the quiet people nobody pays much attention to. Mine had finally arrived and none of them saw it coming. The slap didn't happen because of one bad day. It was the final moment in a long chain of small insults that had been building ever since Wesley married Brittany 3 years earlier. At first, I told myself we simply needed time to understand each other. Every family has growing pains and I didn't expect us to become close overnight. Whenever something felt hurtful, I found an excuse for it. He was stressed. She was busy. She didn't mean it that way. Those excuses became harder to believe. The first time I truly felt pushed aside was when Wesley received a big promotion at work. I knew how proud he was because he had called me the moment he heard the news. A few weeks later, Brittany organized a celebration at a restaurant. I found out about it only because Wesley accidentally mentioned how exhausted he was after helping decorate the room. I smiled and acted as if I already knew. I never told him no one had invited me. Thanksgiving wasn't much better. I arrived wearing a navy sweater that Grant had bought me years before. It wasn't expensive, but it meant something to me. While everyone gathered in the kitchen, Brittany looked me up and down and laughed. She said, "That's such a brave outfit. Vintage is coming back, I guess." A few people chuckled politely. I pretended to laugh with them even though I knew exactly what she meant. The rest of the evening, I wondered if everyone else was looking at me the same way. The little things never stopped. Whenever Brittany introduced me to her friends, she almost never used my name. Instead, she'd wave in my direction and say, "This is Wesley's mom." It was a tiny sentence, but after hearing it over and over, I began to feel invisible. I wasn't Diane anymore. I was just someone's mother standing quietly in the background while everyone else carried on. I never confronted her. I didn't want Wesley caught between his wife and me. So I swallowed my pride and convinced myself that keeping the family together mattered more than my feelings. But every careless remark left another crack. Every public slight made those cracks a little deeper. Brittany believed I would always stay silent because I always had. She mistook my patience for weakness, and by the time her birthday arrived, she had no idea she had already pushed me further than anyone ever had before. There was one part of Wesley and Brittany's life that nobody knew about except me and one other person. About 2 years before Brittany's birthday, Wesley called and asked if he could come over. The moment he walked into my house, I could tell something was wrong. He tried to smile, but he looked exhausted. After sitting quietly for a few minutes, he admitted that the company where he worked had reduced his hours. His paycheck had become much smaller, and the mortgage payments on their house were starting to fall behind. He wasn't asking me for money. He only wanted advice. He said he was already searching for extra work and believed things would improve soon. What hurt him most was the thought of disappointing Brittany. They had worked so hard to buy that house and he was terrified of losing it. I listened without interrupting. Before Grant passed away, we had built a comfortable savings account by living carefully for many years. We never wasted money and we always planned for unexpected problems. Looking at my son, I knew exactly what Grant would have wanted me to do. The next morning I called Marcus, a family friend and attorney I had trusted for years. Together we arranged a simple solution. A private account would quietly send enough money each month to cover the missing part of the mortgage payment. Everything would be handled legally and privately. There would be no attention and no embarrassment for Wesley. I made Marcus promise that my name would stay out of it. If Wesley discovered the truth too soon, he would refuse the help. I knew my son well enough to understand that. He had always been proud and determined to solve his own problems. Month after month, the payments continued. Sometimes the amount was small. Other months it was much larger. I never complained because I wasn't doing it for praise. I wasn't buying anyone's gratitude. I simply wanted my son to have one less burden while he worked to get back on his feet. Brittany never questioned why the mortgage always stayed current. She celebrated vacations, hosted expensive dinners, and proudly spoke about the home as if everything was perfectly under control. She never imagined that the woman she barely respected was quietly protecting the roof over her head. I never expected anyone to thank me. I believed one day the support would end, life would move on, and no one would ever need to know. But after what happened at that birthday party, keeping that secret no longer made any sense. Brittany's birthday fell on a warm Saturday evening, and the celebration was held at her parents' house. Preston had always enjoyed hosting family gatherings, and he had transformed the backyard into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. White lights hung across the patio, fresh flowers covered every table, and soft music floated through the air while caterers carried trays of food from one group of guests to another. When I arrived, Preston greeted me with a warm smile and thanked me for coming. He had always treated me with kindness, even if we weren't especially close. He took my coat, introduced me to a few relatives I hadn't met before, and made sure I had something to drink before moving on to welcome the next guests. The evening began peacefully enough. People laughed, shared stories, and gathered in small circles around the yard. Wesley came over to hug me, asking if I was comfortable and whether I needed anything. I assured him I was fine and told him to enjoy the party. It was his wife's special day and I didn't want him worrying about me. As I watched Brittany from across the yard, I noticed she wasn't enjoying herself the way everyone expected. She smiled whenever someone wished her a happy birthday, but the smile disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. Every few minutes she checked her phone, frowned at the screen, and slipped it back into her purse. She seemed distracted. At one point, I saw her speaking quietly with Preston near the back door. Their conversation looked tense. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she shook her head before walking away without finishing the discussion. I had no idea what was bothering her, and honestly, I didn't think it was any of my business. As more guests arrived, the noise grew louder. Champagne glasses clinked together, cameras flashed, and everyone seemed determined to make the evening memorable. Brittany moved from table to table, thanking people for gifts and accepting compliments, yet there was a nervous energy about her that was impossible to ignore. I remember thinking she looked overwhelmed rather than happy. Looking back, I realize whatever was weighing on her mind had nothing to do with me. She was already carrying frustration before I even walked through the gate. Unfortunately, when emotions finally boiled over, I happened to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of us knew that the celebration was only minutes away from turning into something no one present would ever forget. One careless moment would erase every birthday wish, every smile, and every carefully planned detail of that evening. Everything after that would be remembered for a single reason, and it had nothing to do with blowing out candles. Dinner had just ended when everyone gathered near the patio for the birthday toast. A long table was covered with desserts, candles flickered in the warm evening air, and guests raised their glasses as Preston thanked everyone for coming. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had earlier, and for a moment I thought whatever had been bothering Brittany had finally passed. As people admired the decorations, I found myself standing beside Preston. He smiled proudly and mentioned how much planning had gone into the evening. Looking around at the flowers, the live music, and the beautifully arranged tables, I answered with a simple comment. "You really went all out. This must have cost a fortune." I wasn't criticizing anyone. If anything, I meant it as a compliment. Preston chuckled and nodded, saying birthdays only came once a year. Before either of us could say another word, Brittany turned around. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the conversations around us. I looked at her, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. "I only said your father created a beautiful celebration," I replied calmly. "It looks like a lot of effort went into it." Instead of calming down, she stepped closer. Her face was red and I could see people beginning to notice the exchange. Wesley started walking toward us, sensing something wasn't right. "Oh please," Brittany snapped loudly. "You're always making little comments about money. You think everyone should live like you." I blinked in confusion. "I didn't mean anything by it." "Don't lie," she said. "You come here acting polite, but all you do is judge people." Several conversations stopped. The music continued playing, but nobody was paying attention anymore. I opened my mouth to explain myself again, but Brittany didn't let me speak. "You know what?" she shouted. "You're nothing but trash." Before I had time to react, she lifted her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through the backyard. My cheek burned instantly and the force of the blow turned my head. A shocked silence fell over the party. Someone gasped. A glass slipped from a guest's hand and shattered on the patio. Wesley rushed forward, staring at his wife in disbelief. Preston looked horrified, unable to say a word. Even Brittany seemed frozen for a second, as though she couldn't believe what she had just done. I slowly faced her again. My eyes met hers, but I felt no desire to argue or strike back. The room waited for a scene. Instead, I reached down, picked up my purse, and quietly brushed my hair away from my face. In that moment, nobody realized the biggest consequence of Brittany's actions wouldn't happen at that party. It would begin the moment I walked away. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The music had been turned off, and the backyard felt strangely empty despite being full of people. Every guest seemed to be waiting for me to explode in anger or burst into tears. I could almost feel their eyes following every small movement I made. But I had no interest in giving anyone a dramatic ending to the evening. I bent down, picked up my purse from the chair beside me and straightened my jacket. My cheeks still burned from the slap, yet the pain was already fading behind a much deeper feeling. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was clarity. I looked at Brittany only once. She was breathing heavily, her face still flushed with anger. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. Perhaps she expected me to shout back or accuse her in front of everyone. Instead, I offered her nothing at all. Silence can be far more powerful than an argument. I turned toward Preston, who still looked completely stunned by what had happened in his own home. "I'm sorry your evening ended this way," I said quietly. "Thank you for inviting me." He opened his mouth as if he wanted to apologize, but the words never came. He simply lowered his head, clearly ashamed of what had happened under his roof. Wesley stepped toward me. "Mom, please wait." His voice cracked and I could hear the panic in it. He reached out as though he wanted to stop me, but I gently shook my head. "Not tonight," I said softly. There was nothing else that needed to be discussed in front of dozens of strangers. I walked across the backyard at the same steady pace I had used when I arrived. Guests moved aside without saying a word. Some couldn't meet my eyes. Others looked embarrassed, as though they had witnessed something deeply personal that they never should have seen. The cool night air greeted me as I stepped outside. I took one slow breath before walking toward my car. My hands were steady as I unlocked the door and settled into the driver's seat. Only then did I allow myself a moment to close my eyes. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was thinking. For years, I had answered disrespect with patience because I believed it protected my family. That belief ended the moment Brittany raised her hand. As I started the engine, one truth became impossible to ignore. Some people never understand the value of what they have until it disappears. Brittany had spent years believing I was insignificant, someone whose feelings and sacrifices didn't matter. She was about to learn how wrong she had been. I pulled away from the curb without looking back at the house. In my mind, the decision had already been made. The phone call I was about to make would take less than a minute, but its consequences would last much longer than the sting on my cheek. Within 10 minutes, a quiet arrangement that had protected their future for 2 years would come to an end. The streets were almost empty as I drove away from Preston's house. The party lights disappeared in my rearview mirror, growing smaller with every block. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and focused on the road ahead. My cheeks still ached, but the pain no longer mattered. What stayed with me was the look on Brittany's face when she called me trash, in front of everyone. For years, I had convinced myself that patience would eventually earn respect. Instead, every time I stayed silent, she became a little bolder. Every insult she got away with taught her that there would never be consequences. Tonight had finally proved me wrong. I pulled into a quiet parking lot a few miles away and turned off the engine. The silence inside the car felt strangely comforting. I reached into my purse, took out my phone, and stared at Marcus's name for a few seconds before pressing the call button. He answered almost immediately. "Diane? Everything all right?" "No," I replied calmly. "It isn't." He recognized something in my voice because he didn't interrupt. "I need you to end the mortgage arrangement," I said. "Effective immediately." There was a brief silence. "Are you certain?" Marcus asked gently. "I've never been more certain." He knew exactly what I was talking about. 2 years earlier, he had helped me create the private account that quietly covered the missing portion of Wesley and Brittany's mortgage whenever their own payment wasn't enough. Every transfer had been documented properly and everything had been done legally. The arrangement protected their home without placing Wesley in an uncomfortable position. Marcus had questioned my decision even back then. "You know this can't continue forever," he had warned me. "I know," I had answered. That future had arrived. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "My daughter-in-law slapped me tonight." He didn't speak for several seconds. "In public," I continued. "She called me trash in front of my son, her parents, and a yard full of guests." When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was filled with disappointment rather than anger. "I'm sorry, Diane." "So am I." He understood I wasn't talking about the slap. I was talking about everything that had led to it. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I don't want anyone threatened. I don't want letters sent or phone calls made. I only want the arrangement to stop. Nothing more." Marcus took a slow breath. "Once I cancel it, the next payment won't be covered." "I understand. They'll notice very quickly." "I know. There won't be an easy way to reverse it. I've made my decision." He had practiced law long enough to recognize when someone's mind could no longer be changed. "I'll handle it first thing," he said. "No," I replied. "Handle it tonight if you can. I'll make the calls." "Thank you." Before ending the conversation, Marcus asked one final question. "Do you want Wesley to know why?" I looked through the windshield into the dark parking lot. "Not yet." I wasn't trying to punish my son. As far as I knew, he hadn't known about the money. He had looked just as shocked as everyone else after Brittany struck me. Whatever happened next wasn't directed at him. But I also couldn't continue protecting two people when one of them believed I deserved to be humiliated. After hanging up, I placed the phone on the passenger seat and leaned back. For the first time in years, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The decision hurt because it involved Wesley, but continuing would have hurt even more. Helping someone who treated me with contempt wasn't kindness anymore. It was permission. Grant used to tell me that generosity should never require sacrificing your self-respect. I hadn't understood those words until that night. I remembered all the mornings I had checked my savings account before another transfer went through. I remembered skipping vacations because I wanted to leave enough money available if another mortgage payment came up short. I remembered telling myself that one day none of it would matter because my son would be secure. Not once had I regretted those sacrifices. What I regretted was allowing myself to believe they gave me a reason to accept mistreatment. The arrangement had never been about rewarding Brittany. It had been about protecting Wesley during one of the hardest periods of his life. Now circumstances had changed. Wesley was working full-time again, but the household had quietly grown used to living with financial breathing room. The extra support had allowed other expenses to continue without difficult choices. Removing it wouldn't destroy them overnight, but it would force reality into the open. For 2 years they had believed everything balanced because they were managing well enough. Soon they would discover that someone had been carrying part of the weight all along. I started the engine again and drove home at a steady pace. The night was quiet, giving me time to think about what tomorrow might bring. Wesley would probably call. Brittany might be angry. Her parents would almost certainly be embarrassed by what had happened. None of that changed my decision. Some lessons cannot be explained with speeches. They have to be experienced. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my house for a long moment before getting out of the car. Grant and I had built this life together through patience, honesty, and hard work. We had always believed respect was worth more than appearances. Standing there beneath the porch light, I realized I wasn't ending an act of love. I was ending an act of silence. 10 minutes after Brittany slapped me, she still believed she had won. She had no idea that the one person quietly protecting the foundation beneath her life had finally stepped away, and the truth was already on its way to finding her. For the next 2 days my phone barely stopped ringing. Wesley called several times, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation. I sent him a short message telling him I was safe and needed a little time. He replied that he understood, although I could tell he was worried. Brittany never contacted me. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to ask if I was all right. That silence told me more than any excuse ever could. Life stayed quiet until the middle of the following week. That morning Marcus called exactly as he had promised. The arrangement has officially ended, he said. The bank has been notified and no additional transfers will be made. I thanked him and wished him a good day. Less than an hour later my phone rang again. This time it was Wesley. His voice sounded strained. "Mom, did you know anything about our mortgage?" I took a slow breath. "What happened?" "We got a notice from the bank this morning. They said a payment wasn't completed because an outside transfer didn't arrive." He paused. "I don't understand. What outside transfer?" I remained quiet for a moment before answering. "The transfer came from me." The silence on the other end lasted so long that I wondered if the call had disconnected. Finally Wesley whispered, "What?" "For the last 2 years, I've been covering the difference whenever your mortgage payment came up short." "No, that can't be right." "It is. I never asked you to do that." "I know you didn't." His breathing became uneven. "I had no idea." "I made sure you didn't." He kept repeating the same question. "Why?" "Because you were struggling after your hours were reduced. You were trying your best and I wanted to help without making you feel embarrassed." Another long silence followed. "I thought." He began before stopping himself. "What did you think?" "I thought we had somehow managed to make everything work." "You weren't alone." I could hear him sitting down. "By God." He sounded as though the weight of 2 years had suddenly landed on his shoulders. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "But, why did it stop now?" That was the question I knew would eventually come. "Because I won't continue helping someone who believes I'm trash." His voice broke. "Mom. I didn't stop because of you, Wesley. I stopped because I finally realized I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-respect." He apologized again and again, even though he hadn't been the one who slapped me. He admitted he never knew Brittany had treated me so poorly over the years. He had noticed small disagreements but believed they were ordinary family misunderstandings. He had been wrong. "I should have paid closer attention," he said quietly. "I should have asked more questions." "You can't fix the past," I replied. "Only learn from it." That evening another truth came to light. Preston called. His voice carried the exhaustion of a father whose world had been turned upside down. "Diane," he said softly, "is it true? I don't know what you've been told." Brittany finally admitted everything. He sighed heavily. She said, "You've been helping with the house." "Yes." "For 2 years." "Yes." "I never knew." That was the point. Preston was silent for several seconds. My wife and I believed they were handling everything on their own. So did Brittany. He let out a long breath. She always spoke about that house like they'd built the life themselves. We had no idea someone else was quietly keeping things together. I wasn't looking for recognition. "I know." His voice became quieter. "I'm ashamed of what happened at the party. I appreciate you saying that. I've already told Brittany she owes you an apology. I can't force someone to mean words they don't feel." "No," he admitted. "You can't." Before ending the call, Preston thanked me for everything I had done for his daughter and son-in-law. It was the first time anyone outside Marcus knew the full truth. By the end of the week, the story had spread through the family. Relatives who once believed Brittany's version of events slowly learned what had really happened. They discovered that the comfortable life she proudly showed everyone had been protected by the same woman she had humiliated in front of a crowd. Nobody could change what had happened that night. Nobody could pretend the slap had been justified. The biggest shock wasn't that I had ended the financial support. It was discovering that the quiet woman everyone overlooked had been carrying far more of the family's burden than anyone had ever imagined. For years, my help had remained invisible because I wanted it that way. Now the truth stood on its own and it didn't need me to defend it. Every missed transfer, every bank record, and every conversation painted the same picture. Respect had been given freely, kindness had been offered without conditions, and both had been answered with cruelty. Once those facts came into the light, no one looked at that birthday party the same way again. Time moved forward and so did I. The quiet that once felt lonely became comforting. My mornings were peaceful again. I spent time in the garden Grant and I had planted years ago, read the books I had been putting off, and enjoyed slow afternoons without worrying about keeping everyone else happy. I wasn't waiting for another hurtful comment anymore. I had stopped trying to earn respect from someone who had already decided I didn't deserve it. Holly became one of the brightest parts of my life. We started meeting every week for lunch, talking for hours about old memories, family stories, and the future instead of old disappointments. One afternoon she smiled at me and said, "You finally look happy." I laughed. I finally stopped carrying problems that never belonged to me. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's about time." Things with Wesley changed too. One afternoon he came to my house by himself. The moment I opened the door he wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "You don't have to keep saying it." "I do." He had gone through old financial records, spoken with Marcus and learned everything I had kept hidden. He discovered every payment, every sacrifice, and every decision I had made to protect his home without asking for anything in return. "I thought I was taking care of my family," he said. "You were doing your best. I should have noticed what was happening to you." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You can't change yesterday. You can only decide what kind of person you'll be tomorrow." He nodded and I could see he understood. Our relationship became stronger because it was finally built on complete honesty instead of hidden burdens. Brittany faced the consequences of her own choices. Without the extra financial support, she and Wesley had to adjust their lifestyle. Expensive habits disappeared, unnecessary spending stopped, and the reality of their finances could no longer be ignored. Their marriage struggled under the weight of those changes. I heard from Preston a few times. Every conversation ended with another apology for what had happened in his home. I appreciated his kindness, but I reminded him that he wasn't responsible for another adult's actions. Brittany never gave me a sincere apology. At first I wondered if she ever would. Eventually I stopped waiting. Some people never admit they were wrong, and accepting that truth is sometimes the final step toward peace. One day Wesley asked if ending the mortgage support had been difficult. "Yes," I answered. "But continuing after what happened would have been even harder." Grant always believed kindness should come from love, never from fear of disappointing others. It took me years to truly understand what he meant. Helping someone is generous. Forgiving someone is personal. Respecting yourself is necessary. The birthday party wasn't the moment my life fell apart. It was the moment I stopped allowing someone else to decide my worth. The slap lasted only a second. The lesson it taught me will stay with me forever. No amount of kindness should cost your dignity, And no relationship is worth keeping if the price is your self-respect.